Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Joining us on the line is Sam Parker. He's been a journalist for over 15 years and is a senior editor at British GQ. His new book, Good Anger, looks at the most misunderstood, stigmatized emotion in the world. We are used to complaining that there's too much anger in the world, but what about the cost of having too little? And what if instead of fearing anger, we learned to use it wisely? Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hi, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. And what a fascinating subject. What made you write a book about anger or good anger?
Well, like many people, I struggled with anxiety for many years, and I thought that the way out of it was to learn how to relax. And so I tried lots of meditation and gratitude journaling and mindfulness activities, which were all, great things, but didn't really address the deeper problem. And it was only when I started to access anger and learn how to express it properly that my anxiety symptoms went away. So I thought it was interesting that anger was sort of usually left out of the mental health conversation that we've been having over the last few years. So that was really the reason I decided to write the book and put those two things together.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because we really see anger as a negative trait and, leading towards violence even. We don't see it as something positive at all, and people suppress it even.
Yeah, and it's really important to make that distinction, and people conflate anger with aggression and violence all the time. And that's one of the reasons having this conversation is quite difficult. But one is a healthy emotion that we all feel that's often a very appropriate response to the world. And the other is a behavioral choice that we make. And the gap between those two things is where you can actually find the good stuff and the wisdom that anger has to tell you. It's a difficult conversation to have, but actually once you start talking to people about what makes them angry, you kind of learn what they're most passionate about pretty quickly, which is cool.
Yeah, definitely. Because, I was going to bring that up, actually, passion, because people can be angry about injustice in the world and things that just aren't right and all that kind of stuff, which for sure are healthy emotions to express.
Yeah, and then it's then about what do you do with that energy, right? Anger is the most energizing emotion. And if you're angry about something that's happening in the world, you kind of have two choices. You can vent about that on social media, which is what lots of people choose to do. Or you can channel it into doing something that's sort of more productive in terms of campaigning or, writing a letter to your local politician or whatever it is. So when we start thinking about the choice that we have when it comes to what we do with the energy of anger, that's another way that we can turn it to something that really benefits us.
Yeah. So where's the line? Do you think it's quite a fine line, or do you think once you start looking into the subject, it's quite obvious what is good anger and bad anger?
Well, there are lots of examples of bad anger, and the most common one that we think of is the person who can't stop losing their temper and becomes kind of obnoxious and confrontational and aggressive. And then there's the anger turned inwards, bad anger, which is when we kind of suppress it and it turns into negative self-talk. Finding the sort of line between the two is difficult, but it really helps to think of anger as telling you one of three things. It's either a boundary has been crossed. You have an unmet need in your life that you need to think about and address, or you're being pointed towards a wound from the past that you haven't really dealt with yet. The third one is trickier than the other two, perhaps. But when you start thinking of anger as information, it becomes a lot easier to find that line between, okay, how should I act on this? Is this really about the other person, or is it really telling me more about myself? Being curious about it, really, I think, is how you get to that place.
Yeah. I'm thinking of anger in relationships and how different people either express it or don't. And obviously the worst form of anger is for sure turning to violence and things against your partner. But on the other side of things, there are also people who might be perceived as really calm people because they never get angry, but actually that isn't necessarily healthy either, because they're suppressing it and then could easily lash out really unexpectedly because they're not expressing their anger.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you get the passive aggressive behavior that drives people mad. And certainly I've been guilty of that within my relationship on occasion. It's really difficult. I mean, one of the hardest areas of life, I think, to put anger to good use probably is your love life, you know, your closest relationships, where the stakes are so high. I mean, something my partner and I have done in the past is have a sort of proactive conversation around what trigger points we have with anger. And when you kind of talk about that stuff when you're calm, it means that when you do have an argument and you get into some sort of disagreement, you've got a little bit of a map for what each other find triggering, or how you sort of express anger, and it can help you get out of it a little bit quicker. But yeah, I mean, for sure, you know, turning anger inwards and it creates this sort of inauthentic feeling in a relationship, I think, and that's not great for a household either. And then when you think about children as well and how they can detect these things and these tensions, there are certainly some, risks to never expressing anger as well as, expressing it too much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can be angry at your partner without being rude or without name calling or without finger pointing, or, there's so many things that takes it to a different level. Whereas just having a heated argument about something can be quite normal or even healthy.
Yeah, definitely. And there's an expression that I borrow from football, which is play the ball, not the man, which is a good piece of advice for when you start expressing your anger with your partner. Deal with the issue that you're talking about. Don't start accusing the other person of being this or that. And when you sort of start with a sort of appeal to empathy, when this happens, it makes me feel this way, rather than I'm angry because you are X, Y, Z. You're sort of starting on a slightly more collaborative foot. So there are some really good and useful sort of anger management ideas out there that you can apply to your relationship that help. It can be very hard to do, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Depending on the person, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in the other people that contributed to the book. You got advice ranging from ancient philosophers to sports stars, artists, modern business gurus. What did other people have to say on the subject?
Yeah, it was really interesting going from, I sort of looked at different core sections of your life, and, love was one of them. Anger at work is a really big thing. I think there is a huge amount of anguish that we feel at work because we find confrontation so difficult. I had a great conversation with an author called Kim Scott, who wrote a book called Radical Candor, which is sort of about how, as a manager, you can find ways to tell the people that report to you that you're angry with them, that doesn't kind of hurt their confidence and create sort of problems down the road. So that was a really interesting conversation. And then right from modern people like that, you can go back to, Aristotle and different figures from the Stoic movement in ancient Rome, who just had so many fascinating things to say about anger. The more I looked at it, the more I realized it's actually a subject we've been trying to figure out since the very beginning, which made it quite daunting to get into, but a lot of fun.
And did you find a difference between how anger is expressed and also how anger is perceived when a woman is angry compared to when a man is angry?
Yeah, this was a massive one. So anger has been an unfairly gendered emotion for a very, very long time. And the sort of traditional view was that it was somehow a male emotion, right? And it was inappropriate for women. Actually, interestingly, since 2022, Gallup, which does a sort of global emotions poll around the world every year, found that women have started reporting feelings of anger more often than men. So the anger gap is now at about 6%. So there's absolutely no monopoly on anger as an emotion among men at all. In fact, quite the opposite. In terms of how we tend to express it, these are generalizations, of course, but there is evidence that men are more prone to anger out, so they're more likely to become aggressive or frustrated or kind of obnoxious. Women are more prone to anger in. So that means turning the emotion on themselves, suppressing it, and it's sometimes coming out as sort of other emotions that they call racket emotions, where we sort of replace one emotion we feel as unacceptable with one which is. In lots of cases with women, that can be crying when they're angry, for example. So yeah, there's a real problem there, and that's one of the reasons I think the anger conversation is so important. We've done a lot around the idea of telling young boys that it's okay to be sad in recent years, which is a wonderful thing. I think we also need to be having a conversation with young girls about why it's okay to be angry, just to kind of address what's been a very long-standing imbalance.
Yeah. Does tone have anything to do with it? I'm just trying to think of examples of either my behaviour or other people's behaviour when there's been kind of shouting or angriness being expressed, and a difference between if someone's just shouting and aggravated and annoyed at something compared to someone who's shouting, and you can kind of see that there's real venom coming from them, like they're really, you can see in their eyes, and not necessarily a man at all, you know, when it's just venom is the way I would describe it.
Yeah, it's a really good word for it. And another one is contempt, right? And there's a pair of psychologists in America called the Gottmans, who are kind of the world's leading experts in relationships. And they have said that the number one signifier to them that a couple are headed for divorce is when their anger is expressed as contempt. And it's a punitive, nasty, venomous, as you say, form of anger that's incredibly critical and so on. So that's an example of, you know, toxic anger that you really want to avoid as much as you can. I think tone in the moment can be really, really difficult. There's an idea in the book that I found useful called the discomfort caveat, which is where you might say to someone, if you have to have a conversation quickly and you don't have time to take a breath and calm down and come in a more measured way, if you can find the state of mind to say to someone, hey, look, I'm angry at the moment, so I'm not going to be articulating myself as well as I could be. Again, it kind of puts that person on your side. It helps them understand that you are struggling, because this is a real thing. You know, when we're in the grip of anger initially, it scrambles our ability to articulate ourselves, to form thoughts clearly, to moderate our tone, as you say. So it's a real thing that we're struggling with in those moments. You know, it's not a choice for people most of the time. But if you can find ways to either wait or just let another person know that you're in that moment, you know, these are ways that we can kind of mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a good one to acknowledge that you're feeling angry and just say that and say, listen, now's not a good time because I'm really angry. Can we talk about this later?
Yeah. And you know, it's a funny thing. We have this problem with anger. We've had a wonderful sort of revolution almost in mental health and the way we talk about emotions. We've removed the stigma from saying I'm sad or I'm anxious. You know, I'm struggling with depression or I've got anxiety at the moment, which is a fantastic development. We haven't got there with anger yet. And, you know, it can still be very, very difficult for us to say to someone, I'm angry, you know, and just say it in a fairly neutral way, like you might say that you're hungry or tired or you know, fed up. So I think that's the place we need to get to with it. And once you do that, it takes some of the sting out of it. It helps you reframe the emotion as information, because that's what it is. And rather than trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible or pretend it isn't there or feel ashamed of it or all these things that we've been taught to do with anger, we can start to see it as something that's actually useful. It might not feel great all the time, but it's normally got something important to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. So has this really helped you writing this book? I mean, you obviously got a good place before writing the book, but doing all the extra research and speaking to different people, do you feel in a totally different place in terms of your mental health and anger and things?
I do. I mean, look, I still get it wrong a lot of the time. I mean, it's, you know, anger is, it's a difficult emotion to master, let's say. I'm not sure anybody ever does master it. But I think for me, and, you know, this is the key thing that I think more people need to know about anger, is that a lot of the time, your feelings of anxiety, your feelings of depression are linked to your inability to express anger or to even recognize it within yourself in the first place. And this is a very well-established principle in psychology and has been for a very long time. It's not something that's part of the sort of common public conversation around it. But for me personally, you know, I struggled with anxiety all of my life, could never really find a way to alleviate it for a long time. And since I have started working deliberately on anger, don't get it right all the time, but it has definitely led to a massive reduction in the level of anxiety that I feel. So that for me has been transformative. And yeah, I think it's, as I say, I think it's just an under-discussed element of the wider mental health picture, not just anger itself.
Yeah. And there's some great quotes on the book, lots of other authors and broadcasters and things, people really enjoying the book and saying what a great job you've done. So that's nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I mean, you know, it's the first review just came out this weekend, which was scary, but thankfully it was very positive. So that was wonderful to see. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, you know, the time for a conversation around emotions and what they're for and how they can help us, you know, we're about to get to grips with an AI revolution. Every time I look at TikTok, I feel worse about that. And, you know, what is going to stand us in good stead in the immediate future with technology? It's probably leaning into what makes us human and making it work for us. And I think, you know, emotional intelligence is a big part of that. So I'm glad that the book seems to be resonating so far with some people.
Yeah. I was just picturing the angry emoji and thinking that from, you know, for kids that have grown up with mobile phones and technology and emojis and, you know, always had them in their lives, they you know, would have seen that symbol, and it's not a nice, happy symbol. You know, it's a red face. The face is all screwed up. It, you know, angry. And again, it's that association of, oh, that's a really negative thing.
That's a good point. We should relabel it the bad anger emoji and come up with a good anger one. That would be good fun.
Yes, not exactly. That would be a great school project, wouldn't it?
Would be, wouldn't it? Yeah, I love that. Yeah, what a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it does still have that reputation. And, you know, it goes back a very, very long way in our shared history. You know, for the longest time, anger was considered one of the deadly sins. You know, it has always been something that has taboo attached to it. And, you know, that was how we thought of it for the largest portion of human history, really. So, yeah, it's not going to be an easy thing to turn around. But, you know, I'm encouraged by the difference in the conversation that we've had around sadness. You know, sadness itself was originally one of the deadly sins, if you go back far enough. So, and you know, the stigma has been removed from that. I'd say, you know, maybe not completely, but we've certainly gone a long way.
Definitely, particularly with men as well. You know, it was a real taboo for a man to cry, and, you know, men would be brought up to be men, and, you know, you mustn't show emotion and things. And that's definitely changed a lot in most households, I hope.
Yes, I think so. And what a good thing that has been. I mean, look, you know, anger is something that men are sort of encouraged to feel that they're entitled to, but they're not really encouraged to be curious about why they feel it or what it's truly telling them. Mm. And, you know, I think that's the distinction, is that it's not enough to just sort of, for it to be okay for men to be angry. They need to be sort of encouraged to ask themselves the deeper questions around why it is they're angry and what it is that they need to really address. So, yeah, there's definitely some way to go, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we talk about people being an angry person, and it's generally a man. He's a very angry person. He's a very angry man. But again, it's interesting for him to try and understand where that comes from. Normally childhood, a lot of these things do.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, but it's interesting, that point, though, about who is an angry person. I always thought of myself as not an angry person at all. But if I had actually externalized my inner monologue for a lot of years and how I spoke to myself, I would have sounded furious. And I think, you know, lots of going back to the sort of common differences across gender, I think a lot of women would probably be able to say that as well, which is they don't externalize anger. So they seem like a person without a great deal of it. But actually, if they were to, you know, if there was a microphone on and their sort of inner thoughts, then, you know, there's a lot more anger there than people might realize. So we're all angry people. There's a lot to be angry about. It's a core emotion that is going to be stood up all the time. And, lots of the people I spoke to interviewing the book tried to sort of say, or said that they thought of themselves as someone without anger. Now, if you met someone who said, I don't really get sad, or I don't really get happy, or I don't really get nervous, you might think there was something not quite right there. But when people say that they don't have anger, we tend to think, oh, cool, they're just a chilled out, peaceful person. But, it's not really that simple, I don't think.
No, something I've definitely found in recent years, and sort of smiled at the ease of it. And I'm not saying it necessarily comes that easy to everybody, because we're all different, we're all wired differently, etc. But when I allow myself to express an emotion like sadness or anger, for example, if I'm feeling really sad about something and I have a cry, I can get over it quite quickly, because I kind of let it all come out, and then I'm like, oh, I feel better now. I've had a cry, and then I'm okay. Whereas maybe if I didn't let it out, it would be sitting inside me on the surface. And I think the same with anger as well. If I'm annoyed about something or upset about something, I'll go, oh, this is really annoying me, and I'll express it, and then I'll be all right again. And I kind of go, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? And actually, when you think about anger in the context of a relationship, say it's a colleague or, anybody in your life, when you, anger deferred is anger multiplied as a general rule. And so if you don't do what you just described, and you sort of bottle it up and you don't say anything, and you start to get this accumulative sort of almost like debt, sort of prejudice against a person, you start to really turn them into a bit of a monster in your imagination, because all of these small instances where you've been made angry can be turned into a sort of a huge deal in your mind. And this was something that came through a lot with some of the workplace experts that I spoke to, this idea of, there's a real price that we pay when we defer telling people that they've made us angry, or we just suppress it. It can really long term poison that relationship in ways that aren't really necessary, because a lot of the time when you do actually say to someone, you've made me angry, once they've explained why they did what they did, or they offer you their perspective on it, you kind of see that they weren't really trying to get you that badly. They were acting on their own insecurity, or they had their own misunderstanding. And it tends to be quite healing, when you do have that conversation, but we're very afraid of having it in the first place. And that's where we trip ourselves up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if people want to get a copy of your book, it's called Good Anger. It's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Sam Parker, who we've been chatting with today. Sam, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hannah.